I clicked on go live.
It worked.
It did?
Yeah, we're live.
Okay.
We're live.
So welcome to a live episode of the Roundup, True Crime with Mike. I have a panel on here, and we are going to discuss the Supreme Court of Maryland released their opinion about Adnan Syed today. But before we start with that, let's go ahead and introduce everybody on the panel. Let's start with Lydia, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, I am Lydia. The four of us, have met either through the Murder Sheet or Prosecutors Podcast. We chat about true crime every day without fail. And we're always right about everything. No, just kidding. I am in Austin, Texas. And so we're from all over tonight.
Okay, thank you. And Jessica from Just the Facts.
Hi, I am Jessica Cash. I run the true crime research business, which is called Just the Facts, coincidentally. And as you can tell, I am not from the US. I am in Coventry, UK, but I have followed the Syed case and everything else in true crime really for a long time. So I'm looking forward to the discussion. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Jason?
Yep. Jason Blair, Silver Linings Handbook Podcast. It's an interview-based podcast, crosses over into true crime often. Former journalist. I lived in Baltimore for a good chunk of my life and grew up, was born near there and have long followed this case. So,
Okay. I guess to start out, I started following this case when at the time, my freshman or I think sophomore in high school, he had to listen to Serial for his English class. He didn't care much for the case, but I got sucked into it, and it has been something for me for the last 6 or 7 years now. So it's been on its roller coaster. We never know where it's going to go next. So, and today was some big news that it had been a long time in the waiting for it to come out. So just to catch up, I think everybody's kind of aware of what has happened. But Marilyn Mosby was the state's attorney for Baltimore, the city. So she had been that state attorney for a while now. I think even before, Adnan's been in prison since 99, but she was the state's attorney office. She came in during the Freddie Gray kind of situation and was trying to clean things up. And one of the things she did, or a couple of things, is she created like a sentencing review unit. And then one of the hires at one time, I don't know when she was hired, was Becky Feldman. And she came into that office. To me, I think she came in there wanting to get Adnan Syed released. So they started with a petition to look at the case. And then during their investigation, they went through several iterations where they tried to go to court to get Adnan Syed released. And then Feldman said she found some Brady material notes in the state's file. So they opened up a motion to vacate to get Adnan Syed released. The motion to vacate was a legislature passed by Baltimore to get people that were convicted out of prison. We'll talk about what their primary reasons at the time. So it was an opportunity if the state's attorney's office believed that somebody was wrongfully prosecuted for a way to get them out. So what they had to do for the motion to vacate was to present new evidence or something that said that we don't believe in the conviction anymore. So what it appears to have happened during that week, they did tell the Heyman Lee's brother that they were going to file a motion to vacate, but they didn't really give any time for it. They just said, hey, we're working on it. We'll keep you in tune. But then on a Friday afternoon, Feldman, Mosby, and Judge Finn got together on a Friday afternoon and said, hey, we want to release Adnan Syed. Here are all the reasons why. We're telling you this in your chambers. We're not going to release to the public what's going on, but we want to get him released. And they're like, can we do this? And when they get together and say, well, we kind of need to tell Hayes' brother that we're having a hearing on this. When do we want to do this? Let's just go ahead and do it Monday. Like, give them 2 days or give them 3 days notice, 1 business day. So Feldman emails Heyman Lee's brother and says, hey, we're having a meeting on on Monday. Can you join by Zoom, or you might be able to join? So they have a meeting or a hearing on Monday, and Finn calls up young Lee and says, "Hey, can you join?" He says, "Yeah, give me 30 minutes. I'm going to join by Zoom," and he gets on there and gives a heartfelt speech for the for like the 5 minutes or whatever at the beginning of that. I mean, he was great for what little preparation he had. And during the weekend, he had asked a lawyer to look at the case, and then the lawyer was at the case and said, "Hey, I object to this hearing. We need at least a full week to be prepared for this." Judge Finn says, "No, you can just be in Zoom. Thank you for giving us your story." Adnan's released, and that's basically what happened on that Monday. So Adnan was released, and then during that time, Young Lee and his attorney Stephen Kelly decided that they were going to try and appeal the decision. But before they could do that, Baltimore's Marilyn Mosby decided that she was going to drop the charges against Adnan, period, because she said that some DNA that was found on some shoes that Hay was wearing that day didn't have any DNA matching either Jay Wilds or Adnan, so we're going to drop the charges. However, the appeal was held, so Young Lee was able to present his case to the appeals court of Maryland. They've changed their names. They were the Court of Special Appeals, and now they're the Appellate Court of Maryland. And then I don't remember when they ruled exactly. Again, I'd have to look it up. They ruled that the Finn messed up with what she did, and they demanded a new hearing with Young Lee in person. So then Adnan, both parties actually appealed to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court heard oral arguments last year on this, and finally today they came back with their decision. And their decision was almost basically what the appeals court said, except the one thing I think they added was that they allowed Young Lee and his attorney to at least be heard at a new hearing. So the decision by the Supreme Court of Maryland was that you need to do a new hearing. Everything's back to like when you just filed the motion to vacate. You need to give Young Lee and the family enough time to appear at a hearing, and you need to start this over. So everybody agree with that's kind of the summary of what's happened so far?
That was a good summary. My question about that timeline is, because this came up on the live today, is so what happened with Mosby dropping the charges in between these events? So now we're going back, we're saying we've reset everything to prior to the motion to vacate. What happens with that?
See, I think that's quite crucial, because after Young Lee, Mr. Lee, filed his appeal against the vacator motion to vacate. After that, Mosby then files the nolle pros. I'm not going to try and say the Latin, man. I was about to embarrass myself. The nolle pros, and then in the filing, they said, well, the appeal against the vacatur is null because we've already filed the nolle pros. No, that's a maneuver,
Right?
And I think the way that that Rabia and others present that is quite misleading, because after the vacatur is granted, then they file the nolle pros.
Right.
Well, sorry, it's still a proper nolle pros.
Yeah, and that's so. I've talked to the lawyers, and I guess if we had one. So sometimes what the district attorney will try and do is nolle pros charges that get around other rules.
Yeah.
And the big one that they can try and get around is the speedy trial process. What happens is, let's say you're at 5 months and a 6 month, like you have to get in trial at 6 months, and you're at 5 months, and you're a prosecutor and you're not quite ready. So what you do is you drop the charges, and then what you're trying to do is restart the clock. And the courts have ruled you can't just drop the charges to restart the clock. So the prosecutor can't violate justice rules just by dropping the charges. Isn't that what the court ruled?
Well,
So that just effectively means it's like that never happened.
Yeah, correct. I think the way to look at it is
Okay.
what the state's attorney was doing with the null process was it was an opportunity to make any potential appeal moot, right? And so
Right.
it was an attempt, certainly the way that I read the Supreme Court's ruling, is they were recognizing this was an attempt to get away or get around our ability to review the case. And we're not accepting that idea of you trying to do something to help us get around the case. So I do think, Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, we're really starting from zero on that whole conviction integrity process.
Correct. I mean, it's not completely from zero. And somebody brought up a good question. What is no pros?
But
I'm sorry.
I would just say that the Marilyn Mosby is no longer the state's attorney. So now
Correct. It's
the state's
Ivan.
attorney, Ivan Bates.
And what is Marilyn Mosby doing now?
Well, but
He's
hold
on-
on. a second. But Ivan Bates now has to make it. Yeah, right. Ivan Bates has to make a decision about whether he's going to continue this process forward at all. So,
Right.
yeah, essentially, we're back to the state's attorney making a decision about whether they're going to even attempt to vacate the conviction.
And that was put out there today as just factual, like things often are, just like there are no charges against him anymore. Everything's fine. And it was just, my jaw was on the floor because I was like, I don't think that's how any of this works.
No, this is really weird, and it's kind of up in the air. So right now, as of today, right now, he's convicted of the murder of Heyman.
Right. Right.
However, his sentence has been suspended.
Right.
So he doesn't have to report back to prison at this time.
Yet.
However, one of the things that they're going to look at in as they do pretrial or pre-hearing hearings, they're going to go to the judge or whoever, we'll talk about that later too, and tell the judge, hey, does he go back to prison? Does he stay out on bond? And what happens? And the judge is going to have to make a decision on that. So for the people watching, they asked, what does no pros mean? It is the fancy term for, as I understand it, for just dropping the charges.
Yeah.
So let's say they read like, I guess maybe the cops come arrest you for domestic violence or something, and then you're arrested, but that's before charges are filed. The district attorney can then say, well, we're not going to press charges. They're dropped. So for example, in like Delphi, they could, the DA could just say, well, Richard Allen, we're going to just drop the charges against Richard Allen. It's done. That's not going to happen. But that's what no pros means. It means they're dropping
what it means in Latin, it makes it so easy to understand. It's just be unwilling to pursue. And so it just simply means the prosecution is unwilling to pursue the charges.
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess getting back to your point, what I was trying to say, officially, that motion that Feldman filed, the 10 pages, is still the motion that's officially in the docket. So Bates now will have to go back and take a look at that motion, read all of that, and say, he's going to make a decision. He has several decisions, and we can talk about it now. Is that he could say, I agree with everything she wrote. I'm not going to do anything more. We're going to go ahead with the hearing. Youngly, we'll schedule it for, we'll do it for November 15th, and then everybody just goes. That is one option that he has. He could go and investigate it and say, well, I really do think Bilal is guilty of this murder. I'm going to amend that motion to vacate to add more about Bilal. He could do that.
Because that was supposedly the Brady material that was in the file that you referenced at the beginning, correct?
Correct. So that's yeah. So he could investigate it more and say, I believe that one of those two suspects killed Heyman Lee, and I'm going to argue that in court. Young Lee gets to be there, and we're going to make that argument in front of the judge. So that's a second thing that he can do. The third one that a lot of the supporters don't believe he can do, he can just withdraw that motion. It's his motion. It's the state's motion. He has the ability to just withdraw it and say, I'm not going to pursue it.
In which case, Adnan would go back to prison.
Correct, by default. So, and the other options.
Yeah, but would he in practice? I suppose we'll come on to that in a minute. That's a question that I want to pose.
Right, because that came up a lot today
as
well. Is he going to default to go back to prison if the motion to vacate is withdrawn?
Yes.
By the new guy?
If nothing is if they don't have a hearing, he has to go back. And I've even heard like 30 days because the stay gets lifted in 30 days.
Yeah.
So I mean, but what Adnan's defense team is going to go to the court and say, hey, we'd like to talk about bail. He's already out. Can he stay that until we set a hearing date? And the judge will probably say that, but then Bates has to make the decision what he's going to do. Another option that Bates has, and I think he's maybe one of them, is he punts it to a special prosecutor in the AG's office. He can
Right.
say, well, I want to let this be investigated by somebody that's not related. I think he might need to recuse himself because he made promises on the campaign trail that he would try and help. But now that he's in a pickle, because at the time when he was running against Mosby or whatever, or whoever he was running against, he had no duty at the time. But now as a state's attorney officer, he has a duty to the people of Maryland and to the victims. So that is his duty now. So if he's conflicted because he promised one party in a case that he was going to do something for him, and now he's representing the other side, normally, I mean, if we had a lawyer on there can say I'm right or wrong, but normally they have a duty to recuse themselves that says, I've been representing both sides of this part of a party. I can't do it anymore. So he punts the AG's office and says, go ahead, Jessica.
I was going to say, I think you're right. I think he will have to recuse himself. And like, I appreciate that we've got 4 people who think that Adnan is guilty on this panel. But just to give a bit of balance, Rabia said the same thing today on her live. She said she thinks that Ivan Bates will have to recuse himself.
Right.
So
I don't for once, I agree with Rabia.
No, I don't think he will.
Oh, okay.
Because what a prosecutor says as a what a prosecutor says as a politician means very, very little. It would be one thing if there had been a party that was their client. No more than Loretta James in New York had to recuse herself from the Trump investigations because she said she would pursue it. I think there's a different way to look at it. It's an out for Bates. He has a constituency that is super split when you start to look at his political ambitions that go beyond this. And it is a wonderful way to get rid of the hot potato and put it into the hands. If you were to simply put it in the hands of the AG's office, that would be interpreted as, because the Attorney General has stated that they believe that the conviction shouldn't be overturned, that would be interpreted as him picking sides. But if he asks the AG or to appoint a special prosecutor, it's a way that he can politically weave in between and simply say, it wasn't my call. They looked at it. They made X, Y, or Z decision. So I really think he may say he has to recuse himself. I don't think he does, but it's a great way out. It's a wonderful way out.
Correct. So, I mean, I guess that's it. So the ball is really in his court. Adnan could do some stuff on his own if he decides to go that way. He can always file his own open the PCR on the Brady violations and try and win that argument on his own.
But best case scenario is there's another trial. That doesn't mean he's just walking off into the sunset. If there was undisclosed Brady material, he's probably going to get a new trial.
No, well, we can argue that. No, what you're doing in PCR, a Brady violation is a PCR violation.
Right.
You would have to go to a hearing and say, you'd have to make the normal claim. For a Brady violation, you need to show that the information withheld was material.
Right.
It was withheld. So it's not a trial, it's a hearing. And
no,
that it
but
would have
I'm
made it
saying
different.
that would be his best case scenario, would be to get a whole new trial, because his burden is actually really high to show that the Bilal material would absolutely have changed the outcome of that case, which I don't think anybody thinks, except some of the people in the comments today, thinks is the case.
Well, I think part of the problem in all of this, I don't know that that's like his best case scenario, but part of the problem is the original judge really didn't, and Mosby's original motion really didn't make an airtight argument. There was no review of the evidence or its impact. So I imagine when this gets handed, because one of the things the court required is that a new judge take on the case, which is quite a rebuke. They're sending a message. Yeah. They're sending a message there about how they feel this is handled. And I don't think that message, particularly when you look at the Court of Appeals decision, is merely about the issue of victims' rights. It's about how the whole thing was handled. So, I mean, I think the logical thing, if Bates is willing or a special prosecutor is willing to bring it forward, you allow them to exhaust that. You allow them to have whatever hearings they need to have that a more responsible judge would have. But then Adnan still has the option of appealing, like Mike's saying, on his own motion.
Correct.
That seems so unlikely that would be successful to me. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. It doesn't seem super likely to me after the guy's been in prison for 20 years.
Well, none of us know, because the judge, Judge Fenn, really did not, not only did not explore any of the evidence, didn't hold the prosecution to any high burden in terms of making the case. So when you have those combination of things, it's a big unknown to us because we don't really know what that evidence says.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, that's what Bates has to find out. I mean, maybe he can go and talk to the ex-wife of Bilal, and maybe he'll get some inference. Like, look at his phone records. He was on campus at 2:45. That, I mean, maybe there's something we're missing, but as of now, there's nothing that we know of. Because Bilal, I mean, for the people that don't remember, or I mean, I think probably, Bilal was the religious mentor, or kind of like a spiritual leader at the mosque that Adnan went to. So, I mean, and Bilal was the guy that Adnan called the first thing when he went to jail. Bilal was the guy that visited him the most. And Bilal has no relationship at all with Hay. It's not like Hay wasn't a member of the mosque. So she was totally in a different community. There's been no evidence that Bilal and Hay ever met each other. That the only thing Bilal knew was Hay through Adnan. And so Adnan would be the most person to know, hey, every meeting I went to, Bilal would say that he was going to kill Hay. And I gave him information. Like, I gave him the address that she lived at, or I told him that she leaves through this door at 8th period. Those are the things that Adnan has never, like, Adnan's never once talked about Bilal.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. He's not like, I mean, if you were in jail thinking, I mean, if you're sitting there in jail for 20 years or whatever, thinking, who could have killed this person besides me? You would start, how about that guy I told about having sex with, and he had horrible reactions to it. But never once did Bilal ever come up from Adnan. And he had that press conference, and he never once said, hey, Bilal, come out and tell the truth. Come out and say that you killed Hay instead of me. I mean, Adnan, and that's one of the major problems of Adnan, is he never once tells the person that killed Hay to come out and tell his story.
I mean, it's also hard to look at the Bilal piece without putting in the context of his own criminal record and his own very strange behavior toward young men when he was going there. So, I could see, if I were the defense and I were to make up a theory of why, or come up with a theory of why Bilal killed Hay, it would not be a hard one to make. It's a kind of simple one to make, given his relationship with the young men. Trying to, I mean, to your point, Mike, of him not bringing it up, that's also a fairly simple argument to make as well. If there were, if allegations about the way that he behaved toward young men also applied to Syed, which no one's alleged, then there is a very easy argument to be made about why Adnan would not have brought him up. I mean,
but you'd have to explain 24 years of silence on Adnan's part about.
I mean, we're in the prosecutor's gallery, and there was a post the other day from a woman who, for the first time in 20 years, announced that she was sexually assaulted by a man when she was 18 years old. It's pretty common, right, for people to hold those things. So I see the case that could be made. I just don't see anything that suggests any other evidence other than Adnan's words, which won't be enough, right?
But I also think it's a little different when you're serving, a life sentence in prison to not be the person that brings it to the attention of your attorneys that this happened at all, or that he was even a likely suspect, that he was even sketchy, that he, had a strange relationship with one or both of them.
And it's not even what's even the weird part is that Christina what was the lawyer that both are well, there was a I mean the state at the time wanted Christina off the Adnan Syed case because she represented Bilal. So they
Christina
put in a
was
motion saying, "Hey, this
Christina
guy's
was
Harris.
the attorney for defense
Yeah.
attorney for Adnan. I don't think we
Christina
specified.
Gutierrez, yeah.
yeah." So the state was like, "Well, this guy's iffy. There might be something that you can't do as a lawyer. I don't think you should represent both. Leave the Adnan case." And she's like, "Well, I mean," she's like, "No, everything's okay." And even the judge at the time had asked the lawyer representing Christina, said, "What would happen if Bilal would actually murdered Hay and was just trying to frame your client?" And Christina's lawyer's like, "No, we don't really care." So it's
So,
like, I mean, the judge
clarify
pointed that out.
It was Christina's lawyer.
Yeah.
Right.
So like when you yeah, it was a motion. So you would have a lawyer, kind of like when
Oh, okay.
Rosalind Baldwin had a
Andy
lawyer.
Baldwin. Yeah.
So,
So
Well,
Sandy
is that-
having yeah, cool.
Yeah. So it's, I mean, but so as we said, let's get back. I guess everything is that it's up to Bates now. He has to make the decision of where to go. Let's talk about some of the other things that were mentioned in the court case. I mean, a lot of them was about the victims' rights. So I mean, I think that one of the big things was in this case was that like Feldman and Mosby treated young Lee brother horribly. I mean, they told him on Tuesday, we're going to file this motion. And then on Friday, they're like, well, oh, by the way, Monday morning, there's a hearing. So the court was pretty adamant that if there's a in-person hearing that the victim can attend, like you can't have the defendant attend in person and you can't allow the victim's family to not attend by Zoom. Everybody attends by Zoom or everybody attends in person.
Yeah.
It's just that is shocking. That's the most shocking part of the whole thing is just the way that her family has been treated. And today, Jessica and I saw it, and I know Jessica has something she wants to say about this too, which is really important. But in the comment section, I'll read you two of the comments. One was, having your daughter murdered get you a whole lot of sympathy, but Hayes' family has managed to burn through all that sympathy with their behavior. He is innocent. Which part did they not understand? And why don't they seem to care at all about finding who really killed her? And then another one was, I'm sorry, but victims' rights only stretch so far. Adnan is alive and with us. Hay is gone. Dragging Adnan's trial through hell is not achieving justice for Hay. And it's just like this complete callousness towards these families. And it blows my mind. It blew my mind today. It blows my mind every single time it happens. It's extremely upsetting. And honestly, the people speaking today were saying the same thing.
And I think part of I think we pay a lot of attention to individual rights, the Bill of Rights, the protections for defendants. But I think sometimes we forget that the reason why we have a Bill of Rights, the reason why we have a free press, the reason why there's freedom of religion or assembly is that when you look at the things that are in the preamble to the Constitution, providing for the common defense, domestic tranquility, justice, all these are heavy imperatives of government that can crush individual rights. Mm-hmm. So that's the reason why we have them. But I think in a lot of people's minds, the Bill of Rights have become more supreme than the things that they were meant to counterbalance. 17th word of the Constitution is justice. It is the first thing in the list of things in the U.S. Constitution that the founders say is the purpose of the Union. And so I think, over time, I think we put greater emphasis on victims' rights. And in Maryland, they passed a Declaration of Victims' Rights. And part of it was, it's had several different evolutions. In the beginning, when I was reporting, or actually when I was at the University of Maryland at the college newspaper, the law was passed that required notification of victims, when there was release, when there was hearings. And over time, those rights were expanded. But the Maryland legislature the real, I think, debate, and I'm glad that it came out the way that it did, was, were the provisions in that Declaration of Rights for Victims self-executing, or did the General Assembly need to pass an enabling law? And the court came down solid. Like, as good as Neil Gorsuch was in the McGirt decision in Oklahoma, giving a third of the state back to Native American tribes, it says what it says, is what they basically said. And it says that these rights will be extended to the victim, and that the assembly didn't need to do any self-executing law, which was also the same silly argument in McGirt. And so I think, while I understand, the passion for the rights of a defendant, and they are enormously important, we also have to understand that society will not function without justice.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
Lord knows, if there was no justice, God knows what I would be doing right now. I wouldn't be on YouTube. I'd be like settling some scores. So
I'll be with you.
Right, yes, right. Riding in our bandwagon and raising hell. But so I think it's sort of exploring it and looking at the balance. I don't think we should violate individual rights, but until you can really make a case that someone's individual rights have been violated, we do have to pay attention to our imperative toward justice. If we want to have a functioning society, it has to be a way.
But the idea that you can run out of empathy for a murder victim's family is so foreign to me. Like, there's just a finite amount of time that people on the internet are going to feel bad for Hayes' family and friends.
And there's no, the sad thing with this, was that they didn't have to do it. Like, all they had to do was give him,
right.
Like, Adam's going to maybe go back to jail because they couldn't give him a week. There's nothing that, once you're,
that was dumb.
Once you're charged and convicted, you lose. There's no guarantee that the second Brady comes up that they have to release you within 5 minutes of that coming up. So they had time. They could have taught. They had time to get him there for he had asked for 7 days. That was all that he kind of needed. I guess the biggest problem and the other thing that is they could not. The state would not and could not tell why they're releasing their sister or daughter's killer. That's the kind of what the thing was like. Well, it's just secret. Trust us.
Right.
But I guess maybe not all families will upset or like, for example, Leo Schofield, for example. They had to go to the family and say, well, we found we found somebody else's prints of a guy that's a murderer in Michelle's car, and we think he did it because of those prints. So those are something you can go to a victim's family and say, well, unfortunately, the DNA was retested and it was this other guy. And a lot of the times the family will understand. And there's a lot of cases where the victims will even support the guy that was originally in jail and say, well, he should be really, I don't know what the victim's family in Temujin's case, but there's a lot of them. But even then, at least you can go to the victim's family and say, well, we had fingerprints, we had DNA, but now they're just saying, well, we have some note of some guy at some time made a threat against Hay. That's all they have.
And that's why it's so shaky.
If I could jump back to Lydia's point, though, the point you were making, one of the really interesting things for me today, when I caught Jessica's tweet of Rabia's sort of attack on the family, is it was absolutely unnecessary. It was like a public relations fumble. All they really needed to say was like, we're disappointed and we look forward to working with X, Y, or Z. And if Adnan Syed is truly innocent of this crime, it is an absolute travesty that he spent that much time in jail. But it is also unconscionable to attack a victim's family for attempting to exert their rights or attempting to bring about what they think is justice, whether they're right or they're wrong.
Right.
So, I think that if the Adnan Syed camp of his supporters wants to keep the narrative, they need to be very careful about their words moving forward. And to think that that narrative is not going to affect the way the judicial system responds is silly, because we're dealing with elected prosecutors who have to make decisions. And when you're going out and you're doing and saying things like that, you are not helping.
Also saying that Adnan, when he first got released, should have taken his passport and left the country for good. Not a wise thing to say. Doesn't really prop up what the argument that you're making.
I'm just going to read what it was that Rabia said. Now, Rabia said this a year ago.
We should probably say who Rabia is. So
Rabia Chowdhury is Adnan's most noted advocate. She started the Undisclosed podcast. She's been on board with him from the start. And she said this a year ago when Hae Min Lee's family filed the appeal, and she tweeted it, and she said, Hae Min Lee's family has appealed Adnan's release and is demanding the motion to vacate his conviction be done over unprecedented, batshit crazy bullshit. And then she retweeted that, quote tweeted it, and said, and again, I should have said this at first, but excuse my language. My official statement about all this is that anyone committed to harassing an innocent man instead of identifying the source of the DNA on Hae's shoes can fuck right off. I will not be taking any questions. Thank you. End quote. Now, I'm sorry. That is shameful. That is a shameful thing to say.
You and Rabia just ruined Mike's PG-13 rating.
You've just been demonetized.
It's only cussing. Only cussing here on Mike's channel. I behave.
Shameful. It's shameful. It is unacceptable. And Jason's right. It's a PR nightmare. But this is like, we could easily pick out comments and say things that are crazy from Adnan supporters or Adnan opponents. But
I say at least 10 or 15 crazy things a day. But
exactly. I have an hour, mate. But this is not just a random person on the internet.
Right.
This is someone who has a best-selling book called Adnan's Story. This is someone who started a podcast about Adnan's case. This is part of the reason that Adnan has stayed in the public consciousness is Rabia Chowdhury.
For sure. And how does it help? How does it help?
And it normally doesn't, because normally I've talked to people that say that have worked in the background to get people released, that they work nicely with the people in the background. They're not cussing them out, and it's more likely. I mean, if you're nicer to Bates, then he's more likely to reduce the sentence or try and fight for you. But if they're saying that he's bad things and he's paying attention, the problem is that Bates has not only is he a politician, he also is a lawyer. So he has a duty as a lawyer to follow the law. And so that's he's got to find something that justifies releasing Adnan. And the stuff they've come up so far is not enough. So he's either going to have to dig more or he's going to have to drop the motion.
There's a couple of things I wanted to say on victims' rights before we kind of move on from that. The first thing is today's decision strengthens victims' rights. And it is a very clear development from the appeals court decision, which ruled that young Lee was entitled to reasonable notice, but not that he had the right to speak, which is that's a mealy mouthed decision. That today's decision says that young Lee had a right to speak.
Can I clarify?
It's even better. It's even better than that and bigger than that. But Mike, sorry, I'll just make it quick. Yeah. The mere fact that they're willing to rule on this, they could have simply said that Lee's family had no standing in this at all. Right? So, I mean, to me, just the fact that they ruled on it strengthens victims' rights as well. Sorry, Mike.
No problem. So let me just clarify what they ruled. There was a distinction that they made. So, like a victim's family can't get witnesses up on the stand. They can't put an expert. They can't put a DNA expert on the stand and say, "Well, what did you think of that report?"
Right.
But what they can do is like if they came back and said, if like in another case where they did a DNA test and said, "Well, this DNA test points to person X," you could, as a victim, you could say, "Well, here are the reasons why I don't think the DNA testing is working." So, and what they so in this case, the whole problem was that the state never gave the reasons why in the hearing that they felt that Adnan should be released. So Adnan and our Hey Young Lee had no thing to say about it. So what they said is that the state must present their case about, here are the 5 reasons why we want Adnan out of prison, and then Young Lee or his attorney, they said both, can get up there and say, well, reason 1 is false because of this. Reason 2 is false because of this. I mean, I guess the problem is people think and there's more to it. But I think most of us have watched trials lately. What is the first thing that happens after a trial is over? Like once they get convicted, no, I mean, it depends on, I mean, it's interesting in Las Vegas or in Nevada, the sentencing is right away. So you have the victim impact statements right at the trial, but in some cases, like it comes a month later. But the victim's impact get up there and can say, oh, the reason why I believe that he should go to jail for 30 years is for X, Y, and Z. Or why, like, what he said was wrong. They can say whatever they want at the victim's impact statements. I haven't ever seen anything that says they can't talk about something at the impact statement. So it's not something that's unprecedented. They just can't get up there and cross-examine witnesses.
Yeah.
They can't, but they can say, well, the DNA was wrong because they mixed it up or did something. I mean, they can make up whatever case they want. Or they'll be like, well, Bilaw's not a real, like it was we talked about, Bilaw's not a real suspect because he didn't know her Hay. So that's what they could say. So they said the state presents its case, and then some member of the family, whoever represents the victim, can get up in there and say why the state was wrong. And what they said in the court pointed out is that the judge should be good enough and smart enough to look at all the pieces of information from what the victim said, from what the state says, and says, I'm sorry, victim, the state's right, that DNA test was correct. I'm sorry, I got to let him go. Or that Bilaw was a real suspect, and the judge could say, I think Bilaw killed Hay. That is something that that can happen, but at least the victim gets a chance to say why the state was wrong. So so they pointed out that the court is smart enough, a judge is smart enough to take all the, like as Brett says, more voice, more facts are better than none, or better than less.
Yeah,
and I think,
so I just wanted to point that out.
And I think the ruling today is probably correct on that point. I think it's certainly correct that victims have a right to be heard, and I think it's probably correct that they don't have a right to present evidence, unfortunately. But I think legally that is probably correct. But the other point that I wanted to make is that, and I'm going to speak specifically about a friend of mine, Christina Byington, whose cousin Anita Byington was murdered in Texas. And in recent years, her convicted killer has come back to court with a motion for actual innocence. And there are other grounds as well. That's what he's claiming. For the murder of her cousin Anita Byington. And from the beginning of this process, Christina and Anita's family members have been excluded from the process. They have been ignored and devalued. And when Christina told me this, I was horrified. I said, well, victims' families are seen as victims. So I looked it up, and I looked up the statute. Victims' families extends to parents, surviving spouses, and surviving children. But it doesn't extend to cousins.
Right.
It doesn't extend to uncles and aunts. And I think in situations where parents survive, where children survive, where spouses survive, that is reasonable. And I think I'm certainly not suggesting that the DA there, Jose Garza, has sorry, this is the law in Texas. I believe it goes further, but I think it's certainly the law in Texas. I'm certainly not suggesting that Jose Garza has breached the law, the letter of the law.
I
Do
will.
but do I think he has breached the spirit of the law?
Mhm.
Yes. Yeah, I do actually. Because victims' families are supposed to be notified. Anita's parents are gone.
Yeah.
Anita had no siblings.
It's kind of like smiling.
They
It
have
costs
that.
you nothing. It costs you nothing.
Right.
Exactly. It costs you nothing to call Christina and say this is happening. It costs you nothing to talk to her. It costs you
Well-
nothing. It's and I
And they're
believe-
not this man who has no respect for the law whatsoever is not doing that because he went and read that she's not in a category of victim that he has to worry about. That is not what happened. Or I'm the Queen of England.
Well, it's shameful. It is shameful. And the reason I bring this up is not just to talk about the fact that my friend's cousin was murdered and she's been screwed over by the DA. It's to say that I think actually today's ruling strengthens the law on victims' rights. But can we look further than that? Can we say in cases where the victim's parents the direct victim's parents have passed away?
Yep.
They had no siblings, they had no children. In those situations, should the law require you to contact aunts, uncles, cousins and say, this is happening?
Yeah.
Well, and what about if they're calling
anyway? A
And
good
what about
DA
if
would do
they're
that anyway.
calling your office every single day? Should
Yeah.
you just answer the phone like a human being? Or should you just deliberately exclude family members who are trying to contact you about the brutal murder of their relative?
And you know I agree with you, but should the law require it? And I have to say, I think it
I'm
probably
requiring it.
should. Well, you're allowed to have guns over there, so I'll go with you. No.
No, but I understand what you're saying.
I think the law
Totally.
has to require it
Yeah.
because if elected officials are not following it now,
Right.
then the law has to make them follow it. And that's my soapbox piece.
Well, let's get
Okay.
along
Well, I mean,
then.
I hope that something like other states will look at this as an expansion of rights and expand it. So
Yeah.
that's hopefully so.
But you shouldn't have to, burn something down to get a prosecutor to care about a victim's family.
Exactly.
So I'll stuff my feelings about him down for now.
I think you just have to remember the thing you have to keep in mind is, prosecutors do have a duty to the law, like Mike's saying, but they are political. It's a political.
Yeah.
The judiciary is also a political animal. All of these things are political, and if the political need ends up if the political need of the prosecutor ends up creating a situation where the victim's rights are going to be trampled, we need legislatures to step up to put some barrier.
Yeah.
And I think that is an area in which the legislature could clarify it and make it so there is a duty on prosecutors to do that. Because I suspect these cases are few and far between. It's not going to be. Well, we already know they're few and far between, where a victim has to be notified to say, actually, we're going to null pros the charges against the convicted. That's very rare. And then further rare within that is that they don't have a direct family member, an immediate family member, I should say, who is legally required to be. So in those cases, Jason's correct that it costs you nothing. But the fact is we know it costs them nothing and they're not doing it. So if the law needs to change to make them do it, change the damn law. That is and remains my position. Yeah.
I was probably a little wrong. What it costs them is expediency.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, you don't have to worry about that. This is the state.
Right.
But
Very good point.
But like
The
systems
libertarian.
like VineLink, for example, where anyone can sign up to get alerted when a violent prisoner is going to be released. I signed up for all sorts of Vine-link cases that I'm following because I wanted to know when these people got out. And I'm not a victim's family. So why should I have more access to that process that supposedly protects the public than a blood relative of this murder victim? It makes no sense. There should always be a family contact unless literally everyone in the entire family is gone.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I mean, the prosecutor, that's their ultimate job is what they're doing is the victim and the state. That's who their duty of care is to. And sometimes I think they forget it. I mean, I think the Adnan case was a really one-off. I mean, a lot of ways it was a one-off.
They have a duty to the defendant too, right? Because
Of course.
justice, the duty to justice is for all the parties that are there.
Alec Baldwin is a perfect example of that.
Yep.
Yes.
She had a duty and she didn't do it.
And what I think we're seeing in this case is leaning into your duty to the defendant while not leaning into your other duties to the state and to justice and to the victims' families.
I'm just leaning into getting rid of our DA. That's what I'm leaning into. I'm just being honest.
Yeah,
I'm
I'm
huge
not,
surprise.
unlike Lydia, I'm not politically motivated to get rid of Jose Garza. I just this is this is what I think.
Yeah. No, I mean it's fair and it's heartbreaking to watch this happen to somebody we know.
Yeah.
It's just people don't understand what a big toll it's taken on her to just be completely shut out and disrespected by the people that are supposedly trying to get justice for her cousin. It's horrible.
And to see the things that people have said about young Lee today.
Yes.
It is.
And her parents. It's just awful.
Foul.
Yeah. Hush, you people on Instagram. Hush.
Well, we'll see if they come after us. Okay.
You don't have anything nice to say? Say it quietly.
Right.
I guess is there any
operate in the background?
Be civil and start a chat group and yell at your friends.
You just don't be loud.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll open up a sorry,
Mike. Yeah,
I was going to say if the gallery
bring us back on the rails.
Yes, I was going to see if anybody in the
full-time unpaid job. Us. Sorry, Mike.
I was seeing if anybody that's watching has any questions. Are there
good
any other
idea.
topics, or thinking we can kind of wind this down now? The problem is this whole Adnan case it's been a roller coaster ever since Serial. Yeah. He's out, he's not out, he's out.
Yeah.
Now, not out. So I mean, it's going to they'll probably take at least 2 months until they decide what to do for a hearing. And then,
this took so long, 2 years, man.
So I don't know when things can happen, and we want answers like today and tomorrow. We don't want to wait another 2 years to figure out what's going to happen. But
so, Mike, what is the actual next step? The actual tactical next step.
So I mean, I guess it depends for each side. So I mean, I think Suter is going to be contacting, or she's probably already called the Bates office to find out what's going on. So it's in Bates's court right now. So the motion is filed. I mean, it's still in there. So since he has a motion on the docket, he would go to he would have to go to the administrative judge, I think, and maybe somebody can correct me. The administrative judge would have to assign it to somebody else besides Finn for the hearing. So the new judge would pick it up and then decide. So then Bates would tell the judge that, yes, I'm going to go ahead with this. Let's put it on the let's put it on the schedule. Let's do it in the middle of November. And then they would send out the notification to everybody involved that there's a hearing or whatever time they set. So they probably need at least 30 days for a hearing if that was the direction they were going to take.
And so when we're talking about hearing, you think that would be a hearing where we'd find out what Bates's decision is, or that if he has decided that it would be presented there and the victims would be given an opportunity, or are we talking that there's some procedural things that need to happen first?
It's a good question. I don't know how much procedures. I mean, as we know, like a normal trial, there's like we don't ever watch. Like we now watch it, but there's always a week worth of pre-hearing trials. But I don't think for this hearing that there would be that much.
So they
If
don't. They
Bates,
won't go straight back to the motion to vacate.
they
That's
would
not
like they
going to be the
would.
first thing that's happening.
If Bates wanted to, I think. I mean,
Okay.
I'll ask my defense attorney friend and
Yeah.
like how much prep work would go into it, but they could just say, okay, we're gonna have our meeting
Because
to
I
discuss
think
the motion to vacate.
I mean, there are a
on
couple
some
things.
dates.
The judge has to review and interpret the Supreme Court's decision and then figure out how to apply it. And there's also the possibility that the case will be reassigned before Bates even makes a decision to a judge to prepare for it. But I don't know whether procedurally, I mean, procedurally, I suppose there are things that could happen
Before
but I
that.
don't know that there's anything that's required. And I was curious about that.
Jessica
Christina
will
has
have it all figured out by tomorrow.
The only thing that's the harder part, and I don't know if I've seen a correct answer or not, is how long does Adnan have before he has to report to prison?
Right.
So I mean, the stay. I mean, is the stay indefinite until? I mean, if they wanted to, they could just postpone it forever and not really cover it. And Adnan, they never
He
decide to do
stays
anything,
out.
and
Yeah.
he stays out. I mean, theoretically that could happen. I don't think so. I think the stay gets lifted like after 30 days, but that's only a rumor. So
Wait, what stay?
the stay for
30 days.
So-
And
for the 30 days for him to go back to the
Oh,
prison.
gotcha.
so procedurally, there may have to. Can I say I love my state?
I love the Maryland stuff. That's where my mom's family's from.
Procedurally, they have to deal with the issue of does he go back to prison or not? And
Right.
a lot of people I spoke with today was really interesting. A lot of lawyers I spoke with today, even ones who are adamant about his guilt, think that there's very little chance he ever walks back into a prison, no matter what,
Really?
even if the conviction stands. Yeah.
But,
there
I
are-
mean-
How far was he into his sentence? I don't even
No,
remember.
his sentence was
Life.
life with a chance of parole.
Okay.
There was
he
a
was convicted
huge
in 2000.
Yeah, there was a huge debate about when he was eligible for parole, but his sentences were consecutive. So theoretically, he has not even begun serving his murder charge sentence, which is crazy.
Wow.
He was convicted of kidnapping, which is a 30-year sentence. So he did
Kidnapping,
not serve all
robbery.
30 years to even start a murder sentence.
Wow.
So normally normally they do things as concurrent, but they did consecutive, trying to keep him in jail forever.
Well, that
So
doesn't
there's-
feel like justice if everybody's just like, well, we screwed up. You're not going back to jail. That's not fair.
So there was one case, and it's kind of crazy. Crosley Green out of Florida. I think I talked to Brad at. He had been let out of prison because one court ordered that yes, it was a Brady violation, and then it went through all the courts, and then the last court came back and said nope, it wasn't a Brady violation. Report back to prison in 30 days. He was out for 3 years, and then he had to go back to prison. So there are examples of people that get out for a long time and then have to go back to prison. But one of the things that Souter has to clarify with the courts is, what do I have to do to make sure Adnan stays out of prison? So she'll file a motion that says, hey, he's out on bond now. Let's keep the status quo. And the judge could say yes.
Just on that, footnote 48 on page 89 of the motion says, quote, although the effect of this opinion is to affirm the appellate court decision to reinstate Mr. Syed's convictions pending further proceedings, blah, 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 we shall order no change to Mr. Syed's conditions of release. So,
But they're just saying
and my
pending.
understanding is that he does not have to report to prison.
Which means in 30 days he will have to. So that's
so the whole problem is that you have one ruling that you had Finn's ruling, you had the appeals court ruling that overruled hers that had rules, and then you have the Supreme Court's ruling that overruled some of them. So somebody with lawyer has to come and try and figure out. And I think Souter would get clarification from the court system.
If the Supreme Court is silent on it and they affirm the appeals court decision, it's the appeals court's ruling.
Yeah, I think that's really true.
But yeah, but I think there was a point in time where they said, like, I think the appeals court said it's got to go back in 30 days.
Yep.
So
And so I think because they were silent on that part, it'll be the appeals court ruling that some judge is going to have a field day.
Yeah.
And so
I just-
Christina has a question, by the way, in the chat, if you didn't see it.
Yeah.
So this
Christina-
happened today. The ruling was solely due to their actions toward the victim's family. Yes and
Yes.
no. So this is kind of the problem. There was two issues. Like, I guess it's how you want to say. There was two issues, huge issues. One, they treated our young Lee like crap. I mean, they on Friday afternoon they say, "Oh, by the way, be here on Monday, and we're releasing your brother, and we're not going to tell you why." So that was one of them. But the bigger issue they really had to compel with was that motion to vacate was just a piece of garbage. Like, there was nothing in it to release a prisoner. Like, there was nothing in there that why you would ever release somebody from being a murder on it. So they had to deal with that. So they had to deal with Mosby and Feldman. Really, they committed fraud on the court, and the judge went along with the fraud. And so the reason they kicked Finn off of it because they're like, well, you screwed up, you don't get to do it again. Yeah. So I guess the more cynical people see that they screwed up so badly, there was so much fraud, they got to do this again. And Adnan's team is going to. Oh, sorry. Adnan's team is going to say that there was no fraud. They're just going to go repeat. They're going to show what that letter was, and the new judge is going to say, yeah, that was Brady, and Bilal is the murder of Hay, and Adnan gets to go free and spend all his time with the kid from Big Bang Theory.
And I think a part of the challenge, even if Bates goes forward, you got to go back to the etc. in which are the footnotes and the statements that, the appeals court was ruling on these questions, right? But they spent a lot of ink on things they had not been asked about related to the standard of proof necessary. And the appeals court is sending a message to any trial court that if you don't meet this standard or these standards, and they're very specific, they got into the weeds. If you don't meet these standards, they're sending a message. If you don't meet these standards, the conviction shouldn't be vacated. And like I was saying before, because of the way it was handled, we have no earthly idea what evidence they really have. But I think I have a hard time imagining anyone in this case meeting the standard that the Court of Appeals laid out. But there are other ways and other maneuvers that can be used to keep the conviction standing, but also have Syed not spend another day in prison. And I think for the people who are thrilled that this happened today, if that's based on the idea that you think Adnan Syed is going back to prison, I would temper your optimism. Because there are many ways he cannot end up back in prison.
Well, though, to be fair, though, I'll watch the football games. I think Lydia hates football. But, when you're watching the ESPN and watching the game, they'll be like, what is the probability of CU winning the game? So, at the beginning of the game, it'll be 62%. And then they start losing, and it's 42. The probability that Adnan is going back to prison jumped a lot.
Significantly.
So it went it may have gone up to 30 or 40%, but I mean, there's still a lot that he won't. But it depends. It is totally in Bates's hands. Bates could look at the facts and say Adnan's guilty, and I want him in prison, and then he drops everything, and Adnan would go to prison. So I mean, for a bit. So Bates is the one that controls Adnan's fate for the short time period. But he may get with Souter, and Bates may say, "Well, let's say he's guilty of murder too. Let's reduce the sentence to time served, and we're done." That's to me, that's the easiest solution.
In reality, while Bates controls the next decision, I don't think, and this is one thing that I think I think we may not have talked about this, but as a case goes through the court system, the police have a tremendous amount of power to decide who to investigate. The prosecutors have absolute discretion to decide who to charge. Once they charge you, their discretion diminishes and diminishes and diminishes as it goes through the process. They need the court to okay this. And I think the real sort of power or force in this, it is going to be the Court of Appeals again. With their decision affirmed, with the Supreme Court not commenting on things, there are still going to be avenues for appeal. I mean, I don't think it would work, but if Bates withdrew it, I think that there are opportunities for him to make attempts to appeal that wouldn't hold. So I think we could be tied up in appeals for very, very, very long.
I think the most likely endgame, and this is not like a majority, like I'm not saying this is 70% plus whatever. This is kind of plurality, like that 40% most likely. I think this ends in some kind of plea deal, probably an Alford plea. Because
that's a problem. Like
Mike said, they could drop it to second degree. Okay, but Adnan still has to plead to that for it to be. They can't just change it. They can't just change it. He'd have to plead to it. I think that an Alford plea is likely to come out of this. I think another potential outcome is that the motion to vacate is denied, and they'll come up with something like he's already done his time, and it will be left essentially in the current status quo.
But why did he gain a magical power to negotiate with? Because the court made a mistake.
That's a whole question, and I'll have to try to find out answers because the West Memphis 3 is kind of the same. But what happened in that one is that the court ruled, hey, you get a new trial, and then they're like, okay, instead of going back to trial, we'll allow you to do the Alford plea. As of right now, there is no new trial, so there isn't, like, the Alford plea is before a trial. So I don't think you can't, like, what you would have to. Bates would have to tell the court that we don't believe in the decision, but we've negotiated. Right. We're going to dump the case, but he's agreed to an Alford plea, and that's what's going to happen.
We want to dump the case because they don't have the ability to dump the case without the judge approving it. So the best case scenario probably for Adnan is that somehow the conviction is vacated. The decision is made because of the Brady violations that he deserves a new trial. Then he gets the null pros, but we are so far from that.
Right. That's what I was saying. Yeah. That's the best case.
That's the best case scenario for Adnan.
And it's just so unlikely. I think it's so unlikely.
Or, I mean, it's the best case through that avenue, right?
Correct.
Like, the best case for Adnan is obviously that they have the hearing,
and they vacate it.
Yeah.
And they vacate it, and goodbye, and no new trial. They say, "Ooh, this is such a big."
Yeah, just to clarify, on the West Memphis 3, they were given an evidentiary hearing, not a new trial. The evidentiary hearing, they might have been granted a new trial, but they chose to take an Alford guilty plea before the evidentiary hearing. And so that
evidentiary hearing was because they had the right to a new trial. They never got to the new trial. It was a pre-trial. My understanding is it was a pre-trial maneuver. Because
that's what I thought, but
it was
not. I didn't want to get into
the hearing was not to decide an appellate issue. It was toward a new trial.
It was towards it, but they had not been granted.
That's when they decided. Yes. Yeah. That's my understanding.
So in August, just after they got some new DNA results that no one had ever seen, they decided that they'd rather take an Alford guilty plea than to go to the evidentiary hearing. I do think they would have been granted the new trial, to be clear, but they had not been granted at that point. I do think they would, absolutely. Mm-hmm. And at that new trial, I think, I don't want to guess the jury's verdict actually, but it would have been a less favourable position for the state. But the reason I say that is not just to make a point about the fact that the West Memphis 3 are guilty. It's to say that that there is an avenue at this point for the state to change the charge, and for Adnan to take an Alford plea. That is, I do think that I'm willing to be corrected on the basis that I'm not a lawyer, but I think I do think there is a route to that. But
but it's very complicated because as of right now, like he's guilty of the murder. Like so, there's no new trial. Like I mean, by default, if nothing happens, he goes back to prison. He has to report sometime to prison. So Bates has to do something. Like Bates has to do something.
I think I can give you kind of a summary of the sequence in West Memphis 3 versus this one. They were granted the evidentiary hearing to determine whether there was a new trial. They made a deal with the prosecutors. Then they went to the judge. And when the judge executed it, the first step for the judge was to decide, yes, they have a right to a new trial. And yes, this new deal has done. The way it would normally happen, right, is you'd get the new trial, then you'd make the deal while you're sitting there.
Yeah.
But the judge, the Arkansas judge, had to, out of order, have the evidentiary hearing, and then in order to accept the deal, had to determine the new trial. It was happening in one motion, which it normally doesn't. So it's really what Mike's talking about, that you can't get to a deal without being granted a new trial. Yeah.
But they can happen in the same hearing. So it's
correct.
So, I mean, and this is
if they
come to the agreement, then it feels like a distinction. You're correct.
I don't know, man. Some
So
judges will tell you to pound sand on your agreement. I can think of a couple Baltimore judges who,
or Judge
I'm hiding
Francis
for the gun then.
Yes, right. Hang 'em, Hank.
So the problem is that, and this was a question for Brett. Like once the sentence is done, and once the sentence is committed, a prosecutor can't just normally say, "Well, I think Ted Bundy shouldn't get the death penalty." I mean, I don't like the death penalty, so I'm going to just change it to life in prison. There's got to be some mechanism. They have to go to the courts to get it approved, and then the judge has to say, "Yeah." But normally, once it sends, that's it. I mean, things can happen up until
takes a lot to overturn the will of a jury, right?
Right. Or two courts.
Yes. They sat in the room and they made their determination. Right. They did their civic duty. The prosecutor, it is out of their hands in that sense. Once the jury rules, there's certainly, like Mike's pointing out, there's things that they can do, but without judicial review and some kind of mechanism to change his plea, it's really hard to get there.
Right, especially since this is a reset. It is a hard reset to a point back in time where there was absolutely no reason to change his sentence, let him out of jail, do any of the things that have happened. We've gone back to the period in time before which he had an opportunity to walk out of prison and or have a reduction in sentence. We're back there. So we have to see what happens.
Right, with the courts. Right, with the courts. Right. Not necessarily back with the prosecutor, depending on where Bates. So for me, my lottery right now is not about Bates, although I personally think Bates is going to find a way to punt it or something, hopefully. But my lottery is what judge gets it.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, but Bates is the one that's driving him.
Yes.
It's the initial gatekeeper. Bates could just drop the motion to vacate right now and say he's guilty.
He's out.
I'm done. My hands are done.
Yes,
he could do that.
But then the ball goes to Adnan's lawyers to make the same argument that it should be vacated.
Well, but they don't do the motion to vacate. Right. They do a writ of actually. They would do a
PCR. And they're going to have to appeal. Yeah.
They have to do a PCR, which is what he did in 2016.
And every time they get rebuffed, it gets harder and harder to change.
Yep.
And it's easier and easier for the judge to, your first one, they kind of got to do it, but they can not open a second or third PCR. They can, they don't have to. So, I mean, they could just shut it down.
So I have a trivia question unrelated to the Supreme Court decision, but related to Rabia's comment about the DNA.
Uh-huh.
Well, one, DNA on someone's shoes means very little. Certainly
Nothing.
does not mean that they killed someone. So I want to caveat my comment by this. That, Mike, my memory's failing me. Has that DNA been tested? Have they attempted to test that DNA?
So the problem is, like, normally when you have a DNA request, well, I mean, I guess I don't know it well enough, but when you go to the courts, it's not hard to get a DNA testing, especially in Maryland, as I understand it. So you go petition to the courts and say, here are all the items that weren't tested for DNA. And then they agree to the parameters. They say, we'll send it to some lab in California that will do it. And then what normally happens in a DNA PCR motion is that then what you would have is you'd have an expert from the lab come and sit at the hearing and explain the findings. And then you could I don't know if people are good. So they would say, okay, so kind of, I mean, like, remember from the Karen Reed trial or whatever, that lady said, well, we did the HPR testing and it's 99.9% chance it's not Adnan. And then they would have to explain why, or they would explain the test. The expert would come and testify about what your question is. Does that make sense, or did I ramble too much?
No, it makes sense. I mean, I've got coyote DNA on my shoes. I mean, it could literally be anything.
Of course you do.
I do. I mean, I just went for a walk today. It was like full of coyote poop. So and I would think anybody's shoes, you've been through a mall, you've been, in a high school, and it's not this slam dunk that the very, credulous people on Instagram think it is. Like, oh, there's some other DNA somewhere, he's innocent. That's not how any of this works.
Correct. And I mean, if it was only one person, it would have a better shot. But it was four. Four people did not kill Hay and all touched the shoe at the same time.
Right.
It was not a port key to Hogwarts. So I mean, so they did not all grab the shoe at once and just dissipate.
Right, and just
somewhere after killing
run in
Hay.
different directions. It's just internet people.
So I mean, that's
I know Mike said about
I
half an hour
think the
ago
goal,
let Jessica speak. Sorry.
The goal, which I get, is that you find a alternate suspect who's already been named, like Orlando Sellers.
Correct.
Like if Orlando Sellers' DNA was on her shoes,
right,
that might change things for me.
Maybe.
I might even move
not for me.
But see, that's very interesting.
Nice.
Is that sorry, Adnan
justice, not just
Robbie
convicted people staying in jail.
So what's interesting from that press conference was that they had two alternate suspects. Adnan never complained. He never said, why aren't they testing the DNA against the two alternate suspects? So one of the things that an expert would have done on the stand, you would have asked, as the prosecutor, would be like, is the DNA compared to the database that Alonzo Sellers and Bilal are already in, and would it have made a hit? So that would have been answered, so we would know that question. We don't know if the DNA was tested against Alonzo Sellers and Bilal at this point, because nobody's told us what DNA testing they did.
Well, it's more fun if you don't know on the internet.
No, there's several points that I want to make. So, firstly, about we've talked a couple of times about the Brady violation, and we referred to it in general terms as the Brady violation, as if it has been confirmed as a Brady violation. It has not. It is. I personally do not believe that the note is a Brady violation. In fact, I think that note is duplicative of existing evidence that talks about Adnan's threats against Hay. We have the I'm going to kill note, for example. And this is a note that was written by the prosecutor, whose name has gone out of my head.
Uric,
thank you. Kevin Uric.
I think it was written by Uric.
He has said it was written by him.
I don't know. Well, it's neither here nor there. The problem is that in a normal Brady violation, Uric would get on the stand and say, "Yeah, I wrote the note. I didn't turn it over."
Right.
Like what a lot remember it happened in the Alec Baldwin trial where I can't remember Morrissey got on the stand and said, where she got on the stand and said, "Yeah, I never turned over the bull. Like those bullets never got in the defense's hand. That's her
And I
legal
think-
obligation."
But let's
Can I
say
just
that
add
let's say
something?
that note had
Can I-
been turned over to Christina Gutierrez. If Christina Gutierrez had that note, she would not have put that note before the jury because
Wow.
it inculpates Adnan Syed.
Right.
Why does it inculpate Adnan Syed? Read the note. Adnan is with Bilal. One of
Discussing
them
time of death.
Right.
discussing time of death, asking Bilal's wife about her medical expertise and how they can determine time of death. It says he threatened to kill Hay. The he, Yurik says it refers back to Adnan. I think I think you can read it both ways. I genuinely do.
Right.
But would Christina Gutierrez have put that before the jury? No. It is inculpatory
Well, she
against
wouldn't have had
Adnan.
the opportunity to.
She would have had the opportunity, but
Well,
it doesn't. It would
you
not.
can't-
Would it have
it's
changed the
third-party
jury's
knowledge.
You
verdict?
don't have the. You don't.
No.
But at trial, you're not going to have prosecutor's notes. It's not the note itself. It's the underlying facts underneath it, which is the argument is that it's implicating someone else, and we didn't have those underlying facts. You would have never actually had the notes at trial. But I want to jump back to something Mike was saying before, where you were making the point that Adnan did not raise the issue of DNA. And I think the implication of what you're saying is that you would not raise the issue of having that DNA testing if, in fact, you're the one who committed the crime. Is that what you're saying in terms of?
What I'm saying, like, if I don't know, I guess maybe I'm overzealous, but like comparing, I mean, look at what Leo Schofield did. He was like, I want to find the guy that killed my wife, and I want to meet him, and I'm going to beat him to crap. And I mean, I don't care if I go to prison for life for beating the guy to death. He's like, I want to go find. I mean, Adnan never. I mean, we kind of talked. You hit it and said why not, but he never he never pleads to the person that actually killed Hay that ever come forward. Like he had chance at Serial, he had chance on HBO, he had the chance at on that press conference. He never says, "Hey, person who killed Hay, please come confess so I can get out of prison."
Change your mind
But
if he had?
What?
Would it change your mind if he had?
Well, no, it probably but it's at least you at least go through the motion. I mean, you at least. I mean, we talk like I'm not thinking in other cases, but at least when Ashley Benefield got on the stand, I mean, she at least told her side of the story. You didn't believe her side of the story, or I mean, like Lydia didn't believe her side of the story
because it wasn't true.
But at least she went through the motions.
But
exactly.
Adnan's never even gone through the motions.
And I don't even think the defendant has any obligation to do that, right? But I think you're making a really interesting. You're making an interesting point, which is that an interesting point is you would never advocate for something that could, there's like a 10% chance it'll lead to an alternative suspect and a 90% chance it'll lead to me. You would never advocate for that in court or outside of court or any. And I think that's like, as much as I don't give what somebody does or doesn't do much weight, there are several things in this case with the way that it's been appealed that certainly suggests that you're not advocating for some normal things that people would advocate for if truly they were not at the crime scene.
Correct. Like one of the things when you get on
highly intelligent. I mean, I think everybody can agree on that. He's a very intelligent man. So
Adnan Syed.
Assumes
I think he's average. I think he's average intelligence.
I think he was smart enough not to do that.
Yeah, but you got to be dumb as a bag of rocks.
But
he's not as dumb as Brian.
And people point to it. Sorry, like there's one statement. There's one statement that's really odd that people point to on Conan's podcast. He said, "Oh, I'm the only one that knows what happened. Oh, I mean, and the person that did it too." And like, and he also come out and say, "Hey, Jay knows." He never says Jay knows the truth that we weren't burying a body. I mean, it's an afterthought. It's not like the first. I mean, maybe
Jay would have been so easy.
He's had
Jay
3 opportunities.
So easy.
He's had 3 opportunities to talk about the story. He's never, like during his press conference, he didn't come out, "Hey, Bilal, come tell us the story of how you did it, or I mean, Rabia's like, well, we'll find that DNA and we'll test it against you, but Adnan never says, yes, I want.
Right.
Why, Mosby? Why haven't you tested the DNA against Sellers and Bilal? He never says that.
Yeah, that's super weak.
And for as much as
Um,
I think that Rabia Chowdhury is a shill for Adnan, today she was saying his lawyers should have been calling for that DNA to be tested. And you know what? I think she's got a point on that. It wouldn't matter to me unless it came back to Alonso Sellers, Bilal Ahmed, or Israel Keys. It wouldn't make a difference because the evidence is all pointing in one direction.
But here's another thing that you
and
have
there's another comment as well. Someone made this comment in the Instagram feed today. They said, "I bet that DNA comes back to Jay."
Yep.
Well, if it comes back to Jay, then guess who's involved? Adnan Syed is involved.
I think
see, the problem with any of the
Rabia
DNA
as different than his attorneys. Rabia could
True.
easily believe that
Yeah.
Adnan Syed is innocent.
For sure.
That is not a legal strategy. That is
Nope.
an advocate. That is an advocate who doesn't necessarily. I mean, there's nothing about what she says that leads me to question her sincerity in her belief. And if you sincerely believed he was innocent and not there, of course you would want the DNA tested.
For
Which
sure.
begs again the question of why the defense attorneys were like,
Okay, I need to wrap this up in
Yeah,
about 5
that's a
minutes.
good
So
point.
I mean, so the other thing that was like when we were talking to DNA, like that thing that was crazy was like when Serial came out, everybody on both sides said, "Let's get the DNA tested. Let's get the DNA tested and see where the chips fall." And Adnan, at least I think, said it. The problem is Adnan never put in a motion to get the DNA tested. It was on his side to do it. They didn't do that DNA testing until 2022 when Feldman said we got to test the DNA. So
I will say though, that was in the era of a DNA test destroying the sample. And I don't know if that came up. I don't remember. It's been a long time since I've read what Gutierrez said, but that was a riskier time to have DNA tested than 2024.
no, we're talking 2016. So they never went back and so one of the defendant or the criminal has a right to petition the court for a DNA testing.
Right.
They can do it at any time after the trial.
Yeah, and she
So
was
they just
already
have to say
gone at that point.
all they have to say is, I mean, Maryland is very liberal about it. They just have to say, well, we think there's new DNA testing that will show who did it. Can we get this tested? And then the courts will normally say, but even if the courts say no, he can at least say, hey, I tried to get the DNA tested. But when Zero came out in 2014 through 2016, they didn't ask for the courts to test the DNA. Rabia in her book wrote like, it was talking about it when Asia came forward. They were like, I'm glad Asia came forward so we didn't have to test the DNA. It's like, why in the world would you say that? But we're getting way down into the weeds. Like,
this is where we sing Maryland, My Maryland.
But I will say I do think the dates matter. For example, Othram wasn't even founded until 2018. That was just a riskier time, and it took them years to get this technology where they could test before they used a sample to see if they could extract DNA from it. I'm not
Lydia,
sure.
you know
if
why. I love Othram. I love them. You know I love them.
So I agree with you. Like Brad and I had. Oh, sorry, Brad and I had this discussion.
I'm not positive at that time if that was. I'm just saying this is the one time you're going to see me exercise a little doubt. You should take advantage of it.
Okay,
I have a little doubt.
but I had this conversation. I had this conversation with Brad, and this will be the last one because he had said like, what happens if you go to the courts and say that this will destroy the evidence? Right. And Brett had come back and said that, yes, the courts could say you can't do testing on that because it will destroy the evidence because some person 50 years down the road might want to test it. But they never said, like, they never went to an expert and asked, will it destroy the evidence?
That is darn interesting.
Nothing I have read or seen said that, well, we wanted to test it, but they said it would be destroyed.
So that
argument
like a
was
2020 development that they're like, oh, all of a sudden
2016.
Serial came out in 2014 where she got Deidre Deidre said, "Hey, let's test the DNA."
Okay.
Deidre was about ready to sign the DNA order to do that, and then they said no.
And then they didn't.
And then in 2016 was when they had Asia on this in the PCR. And then back in 2022, they were like, let's test the DNA for the motion to vacate.
That's interesting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think I need to, as I said, I think I need to wrap this up.
Okay.
Thank you all for joining on this Friday afternoon.
Thank you.
We're
Love
here
you
for this
guys in the
roller
chat.
coaster. We're going to do
Love
this
you,
panel in
man.
probably 6 months.
Yeah.
See you guys
I hope.
soon. Have a good time.
Okay.
Love you,
Thanks.
mean it. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for all your
And
Bye.
thanks everyone for
And
listening.
Jessica, don't leave. Don't make the mistake of leaving when he hits leave button.
Okay.
We're gonna spill the tea after the